Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Welcome to Sleepy Crown, where history's quiet tales gently carry you into dreamland. Tonight, we embark on a peaceful journey through the modern royal family's most intimate secrets, from the bombing raids of World War II to the headlines of Meghan Markle. We'll softly explore 8 decades of royal drama, hidden love affairs, tragic losses, and modern scandals, all told in whispers meant to guide you toward restful sleep. Before you drift away, I have a small favor. If you're enjoying this peaceful journey, please tap that like button. It truly helps us grow. And if you're feeling brave, leave a gentle comment below, telling me which royal story surprised you most tonight. I know many of you are shy, but your words mean the world to me. Finally, subscribe to join our cozy family of dreamers who love falling asleep to history. Now, settle deep into your pillows, close your eyes, and let these gentle whispers from Buckingham Palace lull you into the sweetest of dreams. Welcome to the Sleepy Crown family. Elizabeth, later known as Queen Elizabeth II, was just 13 years old when the air raid sirens first screamed across London in the autumn of 1939. But our story doesn't begin with her alone. It begins with an entire family, a royal household that would refuse to abandon their people, even as bombs fell from the sky. It begins with secrets whispered in palace corridors, with love affairs that would shake the monarchy, and with scandals that would change the face of royalty forever. The story of the modern royal family is not simply a tale of crowns and ceremonies. It is a story of duty wrestling with desire, of ancient traditions colliding with modern life, of a young mechanic princess who would become the world's longest reigning queen, of a shy bride who became the people's princess before dying too young, and of an American actress who would walk away from it all. So breathe deeply, let your muscles relax, and allow me to carry you through nearly a century of royal secrets, from the darkest days of war to the brightest camera flashes of the 21st century. Let the weight of the day fall away as we step back in time, back to a world where a young princess first learned what duty truly meant. The summer of 1939 felt heavy across Europe. In the grand rooms of Windsor Castle, 10-year-old Princess Margaret played with her dolls while her 14-year-old sister Elizabeth read quietly by the window. Their father, King George VI, paced the halls with worry etched across his gentle face. He had never wanted to be king. The crown had fallen to him only 3 years earlier, when his brother Edward had abdicated to marry an American divorcee named Wallis Simpson. Now, with war clouds gathering over the continent, this reluctant monarch would have to lead his nation through its darkest hour. King George had struggled with a stammer since childhood. Public speaking was agony for him, each word a battle to pronounce. Yet when Britain declared war on Germany on the 3rd of September, 1939, he sat before a BBC microphone at 6 in the evening and addressed his people. His voice trembled, but his message was clear. The nation was at war, and the royal family would stand with them, no matter what came. The government immediately began evacuating children from London. Thousands of young ones were sent to the countryside, to Canada, to America, anywhere they might be safe from the German bombs that everyone knew would soon fall. Advisors urged the king to send Princes Elizabeth and Margaret to Canada, far from danger. The Queen, Elizabeth's mother, who would later be known as the Queen Mother, gave an answer that would echo through history. "The children won't go without me," she said firmly. "I won't leave without the king, and the king will never leave." So the royal family stayed. They moved between various residences, Balmoral Castle in Scotland, Sandringham House, and finally settling primarily at Windsor Castle, where the 2 princesses would spend most of the war years. But the king and queen refused to abandon London entirely. They remained at Buckingham Palace, the very heart of the city, even as German bombs began to fall. The Blitz began in September of 1940, and London burned. Night after night, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, dropped bombs on the city. Fires raged, buildings collapsed, thousands died. And through it all, King George and Queen Elizabeth walked among their people, visiting bombed-out neighborhoods, speaking with families who had lost everything, standing in the rubble alongside emergency workers. Then, on the 13th of September 1940, 5 high-explosive bombs struck Buckingham Palace itself. The King and Queen were having tea when the attack came. The bombs tore through the palace, destroying the royal chapel and the inner quadrangle. Windows shattered, walls crumbled, several workmen were injured. The King and Queen, miraculously, were unhurt, but the message was clear. No one in Britain was safe, not even royalty. The Queen made a remarkable statement afterward. "I'm glad we've been bombed," she said. "It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." The East End of London, the poor, working-class neighbourhoods, had been devastated by bombing. Now the palace had suffered too. The royal family truly was sharing in the people's suffering. Young Princess Elizabeth watched all of this unfold. She saw her father grow gaunt with worry and exhaustion. She saw her mother's determination to maintain morale. She learned what duty meant, not grand ceremonies and beautiful gowns, but showing up day after day, even when you were terrified, even when the world seemed to be ending. In October of 1940, the BBC asked 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth to make a radio broadcast to the children of Britain and the Commonwealth. It would be her first public address, and she was nervous. But she sat before the microphone in Windsor Castle, her younger sister Margaret beside her, and spoke words that would be heard by millions. "Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers," Elizabeth said in her clear, young voice. "My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those you love most of all. To you living in new surroundings, we send a message of true sympathy, and at the same time, we would like to thank the kind people who have welcomed you to their homes in the country." It was a message of empathy and solidarity. This princess understood what it meant to be separated from loved ones, to live with fear and uncertainty. She was one of them. As the war ground on, Princess Elizabeth grew into a young woman. She was serious, dutiful, and determined. While other girls her age might dream of parties and romance, Elizabeth dreamed of doing more for her country. She watched young women join the war effort, working in factories, serving as nurses, joining the women's auxiliaries of the military. She wanted to contribute too, to truly serve, not just make speeches and appear at charity events. But her father was protective. In 1945, Life magazine reported that King George had initially ruled that Elizabeth's training as a princess outweighed the nation's manpower problems. She should not, he felt, join any of the women's auxiliaries or work in a factory. Her duty was to prepare to be queen someday. Elizabeth would not accept this. For a full year she pestered her father. She argued. She pleaded. She made her case again and again. Finally, in February of 1945, with the war in its final months, the king relented. Princess Elizabeth, at 19 years old, joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, known as the ATS. The ATS was the women's branch of the British Army. Women served in support roles as drivers, mechanics, clerks, postal workers, and in anti-aircraft units where they could track enemy planes and aim guns. Though they weren't allowed to fire them, it was real work, sometimes dangerous work. 335 ATS women would die during the war, and many more were injured. Princess Elizabeth enrolled at the No. 1 Mechanical Transport Training Section in Camberley, Surrey. She was given the service number 2, 30873 and the rank of second subaltern, equivalent to a second lieutenant. Though the king insisted she not receive any special rank, she was to train like any other recruit. The training was hands-on and dirty. Elizabeth learned to drive military trucks and ambulances. She learned to change tires, often kneeling in the mud to do so. She learned to take apart engines and put them back together, to diagnose mechanical problems, to perform repairs. Oil stained her hands. Grease smudged her face. She wore overalls instead of elegant dresses, and she loved every minute of it. The press dubbed her Princess Auto Mechanic, and photographs show a smiling young woman in uniform, her hands dirty with engine grease, looking genuinely happy. Years later, she would be known for insisting on driving herself around her estates, and she was reportedly still capable of diagnosing car problems and occasionally fixing engines well into her 90s. That wartime training stayed with her for life. Elizabeth was stationed close enough to Windsor Castle that she returned there each night, rather than sleeping in the barracks with the other women. This was a concession to her royal status, and perhaps a security measure. But during the day, she worked alongside her fellow recruits, learning the skills that would serve military transport needs. Her parents and sister Margaret came to visit her at the training facility. Watching her eldest daughter work on engines, the Queen must have felt a mix of pride and perhaps worry. This was not how princesses were supposed to behave. But these were not normal times, and Elizabeth was proving that she could be both a princess and a contributing member of society. 5 months into her service, in August of 1945, Elizabeth was promoted to junior commander, the equivalent of a captain. But by then, the war in Europe was over. Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, had come on the 8th of May, 1945, and London had exploded in celebration. That evening was one of the most memorable of Elizabeth's young life. The King and Queen appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace 8 times throughout the day to wave to the enormous crowds gathered below. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister who had led Britain through the war, stood with them. The streets were packed with people celebrating, singing, dancing, crying tears of joy and relief. And that night, for the first time in her life, Princess Elizabeth was allowed to be anonymous. She and Margaret, with permission from their parents, slipped out of the palace and into the celebrating crowds. No one recognized them. They were just 2 young women among thousands, linking arms with strangers, being swept along in a tide of happiness and relief, walking down Whitehall toward the palace, eventually finding themselves outside the gates, looking up at their parents on the balcony. I remember lines of unknown people linking arms and walking down Whitehall, all of us just swept along on a tide of happiness and relief, Elizabeth would later recall. We asked my parents if we could go out and see for ourselves. I remember we were terrified of being recognized. It was a taste of normal life, of freedom, of what it felt like to be an ordinary person. It was perhaps the only time in her adult life that Elizabeth would experience such a moment. The memory of that night, of being anonymous, of being part of the crowd rather than separate from it, would stay with her forever. The war had shaped her profoundly. She had seen her father's courage and her mother's strength. She had learned that duty meant service, real service, not just appearances. She had gotten her hands dirty and proven she could do practical, useful work. She had formed a relationship with Winston Churchill that would serve her well when he became her first Prime Minister years later. But the war had also taken its toll on her father. The strain of leading a nation through such dark times, combined with his chronic health issues and his heavy smoking, had weakened King George considerably. Though no one knew it yet, his time as king would be tragically short. As Britain began the long, difficult work of rebuilding, Princess Elizabeth stood on the cusp of adulthood. The serious young woman who had learned to fix truck engines would soon face different challenges, matters of the heart, matters of state, and eventually the weight of the crown itself. Even before the war ended, romance had quietly entered Princess Elizabeth's life. In July of 1939, when she was just 13 years old, the royal family visited the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. There, Elizabeth met a tall, blonde, strikingly handsome 18-year-old naval cadet named Philip Mountbatten. He was actually Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, though his family had been exiled from Greece when he was an infant. He had grown up largely in Britain, educated at Gordonstoun School in Scotland, and now training for a naval career. According to family accounts, Philip was asked to entertain the two young princesses during the visit. He showed off, jumping over tennis nets and being generally charming in the way that confident 18-year-old boys often are. Young Elizabeth was smitten. From that day forward, she would never seriously consider anyone else. Philip was actually Elizabeth's third cousin. They were both great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria, and their families had known each other for years. Philip's uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was pushing the match, seeing it as an opportunity to elevate his family's position. But Philip himself seemed genuinely interested in the serious young princess. During the war, while Philip served in the Royal Navy, they corresponded. They saw each other occasionally when Philip had leave. The relationship developed slowly, properly, as royal courtships did. But Elizabeth's feelings were clear to everyone around her. She had fallen in love with Philip, and her affection never wavered. In the summer of 1946, Philip asked King George for permission to marry Elizabeth. The king hesitated. He felt Elizabeth was too young at 20. She would turn 21 in April of 47. More than that, George loved his daughter deeply and wasn't ready to lose her. The family was close-knit, having weathered the war together. They called themselves We Four. The thought of breaking up that unit pained him, so the king asked that the engagement remain unofficial until after Elizabeth's 21st birthday. To test the relationship, he arranged for the family to take a royal tour of South Africa from February through May of 1947. If Elizabeth still wanted to marry Philip after months apart, then they would have his blessing. The tour was significant for another reason. On her 21st birthday, April 21st, 1947, Elizabeth made a radio broadcast from Cape Town that would define her entire life. The speech had been written by Dermot Morra, a journalist for the Times, but Elizabeth delivered it with obvious sincerity. "I declare before you all," she said, her voice steady and clear, "that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." It was a solemn vow, a dedication of her entire existence to duty and service. She was promising that her life was not her own. It belonged to her country and the Commonwealth. Those words would echo through the next 70 years. No matter what personal desires or difficulties she faced, Elizabeth would keep that promise. Service would come first, always. The family returned from South Africa, and Elizabeth's determination to marry Philip had not wavered. The king gave his blessing. The engagement was announced on the 10th of July, 1947. Philip had to give up his Greek and Danish titles, renounce his claim to those thrones, and become a British subject. He took his maternal grandfather's surname, Mountbatten, and was granted the title His Royal Highness, though the king did not make him a prince at that time. That would come later. The wedding took place on the 20th of November, 1947, at Westminster Abbey. Britain was still recovering from the war. Food was rationed. Clothing was rationed. Money was tight for everyone. Elizabeth had saved up ration coupons to buy fabric for her wedding dress, and when well-wishers sent her their own ration coupons to help, they had to be returned. It was illegal to give coupons away. But despite the austerity, the wedding was a moment of joy for a nation that desperately needed something to celebrate. 2,000 guests filled Westminster Abbey. Elizabeth wore a dress designed by Norman Hartnell, made of ivory Duchess satin embroidered with 10,000 seed pearls and crystals. The train stretched 15 feet behind her. She wore a diamond tiara, the same one she had worn when she was 18, and a veil that had belonged to her grandmother, Queen Mary. Philip wore his naval uniform. His best man was his cousin, David Mountbatten. Elizabeth's 8 bridesmaids included her sister Margaret and Philip's cousins. The ceremony was broadcast on BBC radio to millions of listeners around the world. For a few hours, war-weary Britain could forget its troubles and celebrate a fairy tale romance. The young couple seemed genuinely happy. They moved into Clarence House in London and settled into married life. Philip continued his naval career, and Elizabeth began taking on more royal duties. In November of 1948, Elizabeth gave birth to their first child, Charles Philip Arthur George, Prince of Wales, future king. A daughter, Anne, would follow in August of 1950. Life seemed settled and happy. Philip was stationed in Malta, where he commanded HMS Magpie, and Elizabeth would visit him there, living as normal a life as a princess could, attending social events, swimming, enjoying time with her husband away from the intense scrutiny of London. These were perhaps the happiest, most carefree years of her adult life. But King George's health was failing. He had always been sickly, suffering from chronic stomach problems and circulation issues in his legs. He was a heavy smoker, which exacerbated everything. In 1951, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. His left lung was removed in September, and he seemed to recover somewhat, but the damage was done. On the 31st of January, 1952, King George stood at London Airport, hatless and thin, waving goodbye as Princess Elizabeth and Philip departed for a royal tour of Kenya, Ceylon, Australia, and New Zealand. The king was taking Elizabeth's place on this tour. She was going in his stead because he wasn't well enough, but he made the effort to see them off, smiling for the cameras, even though the cold wind must have cut through him. It was the last time Elizabeth would see her father. On the 5th of February, 1952, King George spent a pleasant day at Sandringham House, the royal estate in Norfolk. He went shooting with friends. He had a good day, seeming in better spirits than he had been. That evening, he dined with his wife and daughter Margaret, then retired to his room. A servant brought him a cup of cocoa at 11 o'clock. The king read for a while, then turned off his light. Sometime in the early morning hours of the 6th of February, King George VI died in his sleep. He was just 56 years old. A blood clot had stopped his heart. His death was peaceful and sudden. He likely never woke. Princess Elizabeth was thousands of miles away in Kenya, staying at a remote hunting lodge called Treetops. She and Philip had spent the afternoon watching elephants and other wildlife. They had no idea what had happened. It was Philip who received the news first, via a phone call to their private secretary. Philip took Elizabeth aside and told her gently that her father had died, that she was now queen. Elizabeth reportedly went very still and very pale. She said little. She had always known this day would come, but she had hoped for more. Time. Years more. Decades more. She had expected to be middle-aged when the crown fell to her. Instead, at just 25 years old, with 2 small children at home, she was suddenly the Queen of the United Kingdom and the head of the Commonwealth. The royal tour was immediately cancelled. Elizabeth and Philip flew back to London. As their plane descended toward the airport, Elizabeth could see her Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, waiting on the tarmac, along with members of the government and military leaders. They had come to greet their new queen. When Elizabeth emerged from the plane, dressed in black mourning clothes, she looked impossibly young. Her face was composed, showing no emotion. This was her first lesson in queenship. Private grief must remain private. In public, she must be steady, calm, a symbol of continuity and stability. No matter what she felt inside, the crown required composure. Churchill reportedly had tears in his eyes as he bowed to her. He had known her since she was a child. He had served her father through the darkest days of the war. And now here was this slip of a girl. Though she was 25, she looked younger, upon whose shoulders rested the weight of monarchy. The coronation was set for the 2nd of June, 1953, more than a year after her father's death. This gave time for proper mourning and for elaborate preparations. Elizabeth's grandmother, Queen Mary, had died on the 24th of March, 1953. She had asked that her death not delay the coronation. The old queen had lived long enough to see her granddaughter ascend to the throne, but not long enough to witness the coronation ceremony. The coronation in Westminster Abbey was a magnificent, ancient ceremony, full of religious symbolism and tradition, dating back centuries, but for the first time in history, it was televised. More than 20 million people in Britain watched on television, and millions more listened on radio around the world. Elizabeth had insisted on allowing cameras into the Abbey, despite resistance from some advisors who felt the sacred ceremony should remain private. Elizabeth was anointed with holy oil in a ritual that dates back to Old Testament times. The most sacred moment, the actual anointing, was not filmed, hidden from cameras by a canopy held over the Queen. She was dressed in the coronation robes, heavy with embroidery and jewels. The Archbishop of Canterbury placed the crown of St. Edward on her head, a crown so heavy that Elizabeth had practiced wearing it for weeks beforehand, walking around the palace to strengthen her neck. The ceremony lasted nearly 3 hours. Through it all, Elizabeth maintained her composure, performing each ritual perfectly. When she emerged from the Abbey wearing the crown and holding the scepter and orb, the symbols of royal authority, she looked every inch a queen, despite her youth. The young queen faced enormous challenges. The British Empire was crumbling as colonies demanded independence. Britain was no longer the global superpower it had been. That mantle had passed to the United States and Soviet Union. The country was still recovering economically from the war, and Elizabeth had to prove that a young woman could command respect and authority in a role traditionally held by men. But she had advantages too. She had been trained for this role her entire life. She had watched her father lead with dignity through impossible circumstances. She had Winston Churchill as her first Prime Minister, a man who respected her and became something of a mentor. And she had Philip, who gave up his naval career to support her, though this would create tensions in their marriage as he struggled to find his role as the husband of the Queen. Elizabeth adopted a strict routine that she would maintain for decades. Each morning, she would work through the red boxes, official government documents that required her attention. She met regularly with her prime ministers. Churchill was the first of 15 she would work with over her reign. She attended official ceremonies, visited hospitals and schools and factories, travelled throughout the Commonwealth. She was formal, proper, never overly emotional in public. She kept her political opinions completely private, never giving any hint of her personal views. Some found her cold or distant, but Elizabeth saw her role clearly. She was not meant to be a personality or a celebrity. She was meant to be a symbol of continuity, of tradition, of the nation itself. Her personal feelings, her individual desires were irrelevant. She was the Queen, and that was all that mattered. As the 1950s turned into the 60s, and the 60s into the 70s, Elizabeth settled into her role. She and Philip had 2 more children, Andrew in 1960 and Edward in 1964. Her reign saw enormous social changes: the sexual revolution, the rise of youth culture, the decline of deference toward authority and tradition. The world was changing rapidly, becoming less formal, less respectful of old institutions. And through it all, Elizabeth remained constant, unchanged, unchanging, a fixed point in a spinning world. She wore the same style of clothes. She kept the same hairstyle. She performed her duties with the same quiet dignity year after year. Some saw this as admirable steadiness. Others saw it as being out of touch. But Elizabeth had made a promise on her 21st birthday. Her whole life, whether long or short, would be devoted to service, and she would keep that promise, no matter the cost to her personally, no matter how the world changed around her. The crown had fallen to Elizabeth when she was 25. She would wear it for 70 years, the longest reign in British history. But that long reign would not be without pain, scandal, and heartbreak. The worst of it would come from within her own family, from her children's failed marriages, from tragedies that would shake the monarchy, and most of all, from a shy young woman who would become one of the most famous people in the world before dying far too young. The Queen could not have imagined, in those early years of her reign, that the greatest crisis of her monarchy would come not from politics or international relations, but from her eldest son's disastrous marriage to a kindergarten teacher named Diana Spencer. The first time Charles, Prince of Wales, truly noticed Camilla was at a polo match in Windsor in 1970. He was nearly 22, she was 23. Camilla was vivacious, funny, completely unimpressed by his royal status, and refreshingly down to earth. According to legend, her opening line to him was, "My great-grandmother was the mistress of your great-great-grandfather. I feel we have something in common." She was referring to Alice Keppel, her great-grandmother, who had been the mistress of King Edward VII. It was a bold, funny, slightly outrageous thing to say, and Charles was utterly charmed. They began a relationship. Charles was smitten. Camilla was everything he wanted: warm, funny, comfortable with herself, genuinely interested in the things he cared about, like organic farming and architecture. She listened to him. She understood him. For perhaps the first time in his life, Charles felt truly at ease with someone. But Camilla was not considered suitable to be the wife of the future king. She came from an upper-class family. Her father was a major in the British Army, later a wine merchant, but she was not from the highest aristocracy. More importantly, she was not a virgin. By the early 1970s, this might have seemed an absurdly old-fashioned requirement, but the royal family still held to it. The future queen should be pure, untouched, innocent. Charles's great-uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, advised him to sow his wild oats, have affairs with as many women as he wanted, but then marry a suitable virgin bride. Camilla, Mountbatten counselled, was perfect for fun, but not for marriage. In 1972, Charles left for an 8-month deployment with the Royal Navy. Before he left, he did not propose to Camilla. Perhaps he assumed she would wait for him. Perhaps he wasn't ready for marriage. Perhaps he believed what his advisors told him, that she wasn't suitable. Whatever the reason, when he returned in 1973, it was too late. Camilla had rekindled her relationship with an old boyfriend, Andrew Parker Bowles, a cavalry officer 7 years older than her. Andrew was dashing, charming, and reportedly a serial philanderer who had previously dated Princess Anne, Charles's sister. Andrew's family apparently published an engagement announcement before he had actually proposed, essentially forcing the issue. On the 4th of July, 1973, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles in a Catholic ceremony at the Guards Chapel in London. Charles attended the wedding. He was reportedly devastated. but he maintained his composure. Camilla moved on with her life, eventually having 2 children, Tom and Laura. Charles became Tom's godfather. The families remained friends, and beneath the surface, the connection between Charles and Camilla never really ended. But Charles had to marry eventually. He was the heir to the throne. He needed to produce an heir. And so, through the late 1970s, he dated a string of suitable aristocratic young women. He briefly dated Camilla's younger sister, Sarah Spencer. Through Sarah, in 1977, he met her youngest sister, a shy, girlish 16-year-old named Diana. Diana Frances Spencer was born on the 1st of July, 1961, at Park House on the Sandringham estate. Her family rented the house from Queen Elizabeth. Diana's father, Viscount Althorp, would later inherit the title of Earl Spencer. Diana's childhood was not happy. Her parents' marriage was troubled. Her mother left when Diana was 6, and her father won custody in a bitter divorce. Diana was sent away to boarding school, where she struggled academically, but excelled at dancing and showed a natural kindness toward others. When Charles first met her, Diana was just a child, too young to be of romantic interest, but she hero-worshipped him, as teenage girls often do with handsome older men. She kept pictures of him on her wall at school. She dreamed about him, and she never forgot their meeting. In 1980, when Diana was 19 and Charles was 31, they met again at a house party. Diana had blossomed into a beautiful young woman, tall, with that distinctive aristocratic prettiness, shy but charming. Charles was at a low point, mourning the death of his beloved great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who had been killed by an IRA bomb the previous year. Diana expressed sympathy for his loss, and Charles was touched by her compassion. They began dating in the summer of 1980. The press immediately took notice. Here was Lady Diana Spencer, aristocratic, young, blonde, pretty, and crucially, she had no romantic past. She was exactly what Charles needed, a suitable, virginal bride who could become queen. Diana was working as a kindergarten teacher's assistant at the Young England School in Pimlico. The press laid siege to her flat and followed her everywhere. She handled the attention with grace at first, smiling shyly at cameras, blushing charmingly. The public fell in love with her immediately. She was so young, so innocent, so seemingly sweet and vulnerable. The tabloids called her Shy D. Charles proposed on the 6th of February, 1981, at Windsor Castle. He gave her a ring, a 12-carat oval blue sapphire surrounded by 14 diamonds. She accepted. The engagement was announced on the 24th of February. In a television interview, when asked if they were in love, Diana blushed and said, "Of course." Charles added, with what seemed like remarkable callousness, "Whatever love means." That phrase, "whatever love means," would be dissected endlessly in years to come. At the time, people assumed he was just being philosophical, typically awkward in the way Charles often was, but in retrospect, it seemed like a warning sign that he didn't truly love her, at least not in the way she deserved. Diana moved into Clarence House and then to Buckingham Palace before the wedding. She should have been happy, but she was miserable. She later said she felt incredibly isolated and lonely. The palace staff treated her formally, not warmly. Charles was often away. No one prepared her adequately for what her life would be like as Princess of Wales. She felt like she was drowning, and no one threw her a lifeline. She reportedly developed bulimia in the months before the wedding, binging and purging to cope with the stress. She grew alarmingly thin. She cried frequently. She had doubts about the marriage, but felt it was too late to back out. The wedding date was set. The invitations were sent. The world was watching. And there was another problem, one Diana didn't fully understand yet. Charles had never stopped loving Camilla. Just days before his wedding, according to reports, Charles met with Camilla for one last time. Some claimed they said goodbye as lovers. Others said they promised to remain friends. Whatever happened in that meeting, Camilla's presence would haunt Diana's marriage from the very beginning. The wedding took place on the 29th of July, 1981, at St. Paul's Cathedral. It was dubbed the wedding of the century. 750 million people around the world watched on television. London was packed with celebrating crowds. Diana arrived at the cathedral in a glass coach, looking like a fairy tale princess. Her wedding dress was spectacular. Ivory silk taffeta and antique lace, with a 25-foot train, enormous puffed sleeves, and 10,000 pearls hand-sewn onto the bodice and skirt. It was designed by Elizabeth and David Emanuel. Diana looked impossibly young and innocent as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Charles wore his naval dress uniform. He looked nervous. Diana looked terrified. During the vows, she mixed up Charles's names, calling him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George. He promised to give thee all my worldly goods instead of share with thee. They both stumbled through the words, young and nervous and overwhelmed. And then they were married. They kissed on the balcony of Buckingham Palace before millions of cheering onlookers. They rode through London in an open carriage, waving to ecstatic crowds. It looked perfect. It looked like a fairy tale come true. But fairy tales aren't real. And from the very beginning, the marriage was troubled. The honeymoon started with a cruise on the Royal Yacht Britannia, then continued at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. It should have been romantic, but it was reportedly strained and awkward. Charles brought books on philosophy to read. Diana wanted attention and affection. They were completely unsuited to each other. He was intellectual and introverted. She was emotional and needed connection. He was 32, set in his ways. She was 20, still forming her identity. And Camilla was there, a ghost between them. Charles wore cufflinks Camilla had given him on the honeymoon. Diana noticed. She later said that from the beginning, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. But publicly, everything appeared perfect. Diana was instantly, phenomenally popular. When they went on their first royal tour together to Wales in October of 1981, the crowd screamed for Diana and looked disappointed when Charles came over to their side. Diana was young, beautiful, warm. She connected with people emotionally in a way the reserved, formal royal family never had. She hugged people. She touched them. She got down on her knees to talk to children at their eye level. She was genuine and empathetic in a way that felt revolutionary for royalty. Charles reportedly felt jealous and resentful. He was the Prince of Wales, the future king. But everyone wanted Diana. His long-planned speeches were barely covered in the press. The headlines were all about Diana's clothes, Diana's hair, Diana's smile. He felt diminished, pushed to the side. On the 21st of June, 1982, Diana gave birth to Prince William Arthur Philip Louis at St. Mary's Hospital in London. Charles was present for the birth, unusual for royal fathers at that time. He was reportedly delighted with his son and heir. The nation celebrated. The line of succession was secured. But the joy didn't last. Diana struggled with severe postnatal depression. She later described feeling completely overwhelmed, unable to cope, desperately needing support that she didn't receive. Charles didn't understand. Mental health wasn't discussed in the royal family. Diana was expected to simply carry on, smile for cameras, perform her duties. She felt abandoned and alone. A second son, Prince Henry Charles Albert David, Harry, was born on the 15th of September, 1984. Diana loved her boys fiercely. They became her purpose, her joy. but her marriage continued to deteriorate. Charles and Camilla had reportedly rekindled their affair by 1986. Camilla's own marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles was troubled. Andrew had his own affairs, and by some accounts, he didn't object to his wife's relationship with the prince. Whether this is true or not, Charles and Camilla were certainly in regular contact. They spoke on the phone. They met at the homes of discreet friends. They maintained their connection. Diana suspected. She later said she found evidence, phone bills showing calls to Camilla, letters, gifts. In 1989, at a party, Diana confronted Camilla directly. She later described the conversation, how she told Camilla she knew about the affair, how Camilla tried to deflect. "I'm sorry, I'm in the way," Diana reportedly said. "I obviously am in the way, and it must be hell for both of you. But I do know what's going on." The 1980s were glamorous on the surface. Diana was the most photographed woman in the world. She wore stunning designer clothes. She attended glittering events. She was on the cover of every magazine. She became a global icon of style and beauty. But behind closed doors, she was falling apart. Her bulimia worsened. She made several apparent suicide attempts, though whether these were genuine attempts or cries for help is debated. She threw herself downstairs while pregnant. She cut herself with a lemon slicer. She was desperately unhappy, crying out for help in the only way she knew how. The royal family didn't know how to deal with her. They saw her behavior as hysterical, manipulative, attention-seeking. They expected her to maintain the stiff upper lip, to hide her feelings, to present a composed face to the world, as Elizabeth had always done. But Diana couldn't do that. She was emotional and honest, sometimes brutally so. Charles retreated. He couldn't cope with Diana's emotional intensity. He turned increasingly to Camilla for comfort and support, the woman who had always understood him, who didn't make emotional demands, who listened and soothed, the woman he should have married in the first place. Diana began having affairs of her own. She grew close to her riding instructor, James Hewitt, in the late 1980s. The affair lasted several years. She also had relationships with art dealer Oliver Hoare and rugby player Will Carling. Some saw these as revenge affairs, Diana striking back at Charles. Others saw them as a desperate search for the love and affection she craved. By the early 1990s, the marriage was effectively over. They lived separate lives, barely speaking, connected only by their sons and official duties. But they still had to appear together publicly, smiling for cameras, pretending everything was fine. The pretense became impossible to maintain. In June of 1992, a book titled Diana, Her True Story by Andrew Morton was published. It caused a sensation. The book revealed Diana's bulimia, her suicide attempts, her misery in the marriage, and Charles's affair with Camilla. It portrayed Diana as a victim of a cold, uncaring royal family and an unfaithful husband. Initially, Diana denied any involvement with the book, but it later emerged that she had secretly cooperated with Morton, providing information through an intermediary, and even recording tapes answering his questions. She wanted the world to know her side of the story. Then, in November of 1992, a transcript of a phone call between Diana and James Gilby was published in the tabloids. In the call, recorded in 1989, Gilby calls Diana Squidgy repeatedly, and they discuss her unhappiness with Charles and the royal family. The scandal was dubbed Squidgygate. Worse was to come. In January of 1993, the Sunday Mirror and other tabloids published a transcript of a phone conversation between Charles and Camilla from December of 1989. The conversation was intimate, sexual, and deeply embarrassing. At one point, Charles expressed a wish to live inside Camilla's trousers. then joked about being reincarnated as a tampon. The scandal was nicknamed Camillagate or Tampongate. It was humiliating for Charles, for Camilla, for the entire royal family. Queen Elizabeth called 1992 her annus horribilis, horrible year. The marriages of 3 of her 4 children had collapsed. Windsor Castle had been badly damaged by fire, and the Wales marriage, which was supposed to secure the succession and modernise the monarchy, had become an international scandal. On the 9th of December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced in the House of Commons that Charles and Diana had agreed to separate. They would live apart, but would not divorce. They would continue to carry out their official duties. The statement emphasised that there were no plans for divorce and that Diana would still become queen if Charles became king. But the separation didn't end the drama. Diana and Charles continued their war through the press. Each had supporters who leaked stories favourable to their side. Diana cultivated relationships with journalists. Charles's camp fought back with their own briefings. In June of 1994, in a documentary about Charles, he admitted to adultery with Camilla, saying he had been faithful to Diana until their marriage became irretrievably broken down, us both having tried. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged the affair. Diana struck back the following year. In November of 1995, she gave an interview to BBC's Panorama programme, conducted by Martin Bashir. 23 million people in Britain watched. Diana was devastating. She discussed her bulimia, her self-harm, her postnatal depression. She admitted to her affair with James Hewitt. She said there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. When asked if she thought Charles would ever be king, she said she didn't think he wanted the job and that she would like to be a queen of people's hearts. The interview was a sensation, but it backfired on Diana. Queen Elizabeth, who had been patient with the situation for years, decided enough was enough. She wrote to both Charles and Diana, urging them to divorce quickly. Diana initially resisted, but eventually agreed. The divorce was finalised on the 28th of August, 1996. Diana received a settlement of £17 million and an annual allowance for her office expenses. She kept her apartments at Kensington Palace, but she lost the title Her Royal Highness. She would be known simply as Diana, Princess of Wales. Charles had insisted on this, reportedly. Diana was devastated by the loss of her HRH title, though her son William reportedly promised that when he became king, he would give it back to her. Diana was now free of the royal family, at least officially. She threw herself into her charity work, particularly her campaign to ban landmines. She travelled to Angola and Bosnia, walking through minefields, meeting with survivors of mine accidents, drawing international attention to the cause. 3 months after her visit to Angola, 122 countries signed the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Treaty in Ottawa. Her celebrity and compassion had achieved real change. She also pursued her personal life. She dated heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, reportedly very seriously, for 2 years. When that relationship ended in the summer of 1997, she began seeing Dodi Fayed, the son of Mohammed Al Fayed, the Egyptian billionaire owner of Harrods department store. The relationship with Dodi was intense but brief. They vacationed together on his father's yacht in the Mediterranean. The paparazzi followed relentlessly, taking photographs of Diana in a swimsuit, of her and Dodi embracing. The media speculation was frenzied. Were they engaged? Would Diana marry a Muslim? Would she move to Paris? On the 31st of August, 1997, Diana and Dodi were in Paris. They had dinner at the Ritz Hotel, which Mohammed Al Fayed owned. Paparazzi swarmed outside. To evade them, they left through a back entrance and got into a Mercedes driven by Henri Paul, the acting head of security at the Ritz. They sped through the streets of Paris, pursued by paparazzi on motorcycles. Just after midnight, in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, Henri Paul lost control of the car. The Mercedes crashed into a pillar at high speed. Dodi and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Diana was badly injured but alive. She was extracted from the wreckage and rushed to hospital. Despite desperate efforts to save her, Diana, Princess of Wales, died at 4 a.m. on the 31st of August, 1997. She was just 36 years old. The news reached Balmoral Castle in the early hours of that August morning. Queen Elizabeth was awoken and told that Diana had been in a car accident. At first, the report suggested she was injured but would survive. Then came the devastating update. Diana was dead. Charles was immediately informed. He had to wake his sons, 15-year-old William and 12-year-old Harry, and tell them their mother was gone. One can only imagine that conversation, the moment when childhood ends abruptly and painfully. The boys reportedly took the news with stunned silence, too shocked to fully comprehend what they were being told. The royals' family's initial response to Diana's death would become one of the most criticised moments in Queen Elizabeth's reign. They remained at Balmoral, away from London, away from the public outpouring of grief that was already beginning. They made no public statement. The flag at Buckingham Palace was not lowered to half-mast. Protocol dictated that the flag only flew when the Queen was in residence, and since she was at Balmoral, no flag flew at all. But the British public didn't care about protocol. They were devastated. Diana had been their princess, the people's princess, as Prime Minister Tony Blair called her in an emotional statement on the morning of her death. Blair's words, "She was the people's princess, and that is how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and our memories forever," captured what millions felt. People flooded to Kensington Palace, Diana's London home, bringing flowers. Mountains of bouquets piled up against the gates, so many flowers that the scent was overwhelming. People stood weeping openly. They left notes, teddy bears, photographs. More than 1 million bouquets would eventually be left. The grief was unprecedented, shocking in its intensity, and the royal family remained silent at Balmoral. The press turned hostile. Where was the Queen? Why hadn't she returned to London? Why was there no statement, no acknowledgement of the nation's grief? The criticism grew fiercer each day. The monarchy, which Diana had both humanized and destabilized, now seemed cold and out of touch. People began to question whether the institution had any relevance in modern Britain. Prince Charles, to his credit, immediately flew to Paris to bring Diana's body home. Whatever their troubled history, she was the mother of his children, and he performed this duty with dignity. Diana's coffin was draped in the royal standard and topped with white lilies. Charles accompanied it back to Britain, where it was taken to the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace. Finally, on the 5th of September, 5 days after Diana's death, Queen Elizabeth made a live television address to the nation. She spoke from Buckingham Palace, having finally returned to London. It was a rare personal statement. Elizabeth almost never gave speeches about family matters. Since last Sunday's dreadful news, we have seen, throughout Britain and around the world, an overwhelming expression of sadness at Diana's death, the Queen said, her voice steady and formal. We have all been trying in our different ways to cope. It is not easy to express a sense of loss, since the initial shock is often succeeded by a mixture of other feelings, disbelief, incomprehension, anger, and concern for those who remain. She spoke about Diana's qualities, her work with charities, her love for her sons. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death, Elizabeth said. The Queen also addressed the criticism directly, explaining that she and Prince Philip had been at Balmoral with William and Harry. because they believed the boys needed privacy to grieve away from public scrutiny. It was enough to calm the immediate crisis, but the damage had been done. The royal family had seemed heartless when the nation needed compassion. Diana, even in death, had shown the limitations of the old royal approach. The stiff upper lip, the formal distance, the refusal to show emotion. The world had changed, and the monarchy would have to change too, or risk becoming irrelevant. Diana's funeral took place on the 6th of September 1997 at Westminster Abbey. It was one of the most watched events in television history. An estimated 2.5 billion people around the world tuned in. The streets of London were lined with mourners, silent and weeping as the funeral cortege passed. The image that will haunt everyone who saw it. William and Harry, in dark suits, walking behind their mother's coffin through the streets of London. William was 15, Harry was 12. Their father walked with them, as did their grandfather, Prince Philip, and their uncle, Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, Earl Spencer. The boys' faces were composed, but their pain was visible. No child should have to walk behind their parents' coffin while millions watch. The funeral service was deeply moving. Elton John, a friend of Diana's, sang a rewritten version of his song, Candle in the Wind. Originally written about Marilyn Monroe, the new lyrics mourned Diana as England's rose. There wasn't a dry eye in the Abbey. Then Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, gave a eulogy that was both beautiful and pointed. He spoke about Diana's qualities, her love for her sons, her compassion for the suffering, her struggle with the media. But he also delivered what many saw as a rebuke to the royal family. I stand before you today, the representative of a family in grief, in a country in mourning, before a world in shock, Spencer began. He praised Diana's intuitive warmth, her ability to make everyone feel special. He spoke about her eating disorders and mental health struggles, attributing them partly to media harassment. Then he made a promise to William and Harry. We, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you are steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. It was a clear suggestion that the royal family, with all its duty and tradition, had damaged Diana, and that her blood family would protect her sons from the same fate. The mourners gathered outside the Abbey, listening to the service on speakers, applauded. Inside the Abbey, the royals sat, silent and stone-faced. Diana was laid to rest on an island in the middle of a lake at Althorpe, her family's estate. The grave was deliberately placed on an island to prevent it from becoming a site that could be vandalized or where fans might trespass. It was a private, peaceful resting place for a woman who had known too little peace in her short life. The weeks and months after Diana's death were difficult for the royal family. Charles, in particular, faced intense scrutiny. He had to navigate being a single father to two grieving boys, while also dealing with his own complicated grief, guilt, perhaps, mixed with loss. He reportedly threw himself into parenting with a dedication he hadn't always shown before. He protected his sons from the worst of the media attention. He tried to give them as normal a life as possible, given their circumstances. Camilla disappeared from public view. She had been slowly, cautiously appearing in public with Charles before Diana's death. They had been photographed together, carefully stage managing their relationship's public rehabilitation. But now, in the wake of Diana's death and the public's grief, Camilla retreated completely. The woman many blamed for destroying Diana's marriage couldn't possibly show her face. Queen Elizabeth, too, seemed to absorb lessons from the crisis. In the years that followed, the royal family became slightly more accessible, slightly warmer, slightly more willing to show emotion. They would never be as open as Diana had been, but they recognized that the old ways, the complete emotional reserve, no longer worked in the modern media age. William and Harry grew up in the shadow of their mother's death and her legend. William, the heir, seemed to cope by becoming more reserved, more like his grandmother and father. Harry, the spare, seemed more openly emotional, more like his mother. Both boys would speak in later years about the trauma of that time, of walking behind the coffin, of the public nature of their grief, of losing their mother when they most needed her. Diana's death marked the end of an era. The fairy tale had ended in tragedy. The princess who was supposed to modernize the monarchy had instead exposed its flaws and limitations. She had been too much, too emotional, too honest, too rebellious for an institution built on restraint and tradition. But she had also been exactly what many people loved about her. She had been real in a way royals were never supposed to be real. As the millennium approached, the question hung over the House of Windsor. Could they survive in the modern world? Could they adapt? Or would they fade into irrelevance, crushed by their own inability to change? The answer would come partly from an unexpected source, Charles and Camilla's slow, patient rehabilitation, and more importantly, from William's choice of bride. A commoner, a middle-class girl, someone who would bring a fresh perspective to the ancient institution. But that was still years away. First, Charles and Camilla had to win over a public that despised her and blamed her for Diana's unhappiness. In the years immediately following Diana's death, Camilla Parker Bowles was the most hated woman in Britain. The public saw her as the woman who had destroyed a fairy tale marriage, who had stolen Charles from Diana, who bore significant responsibility for Diana's unhappiness. Camilla received death threats. She couldn't appear in public without facing hostility. Her name was synonymous with adultery and betrayal. Charles faced a dilemma. He loved Camilla. He had always loved her, probably more than he had ever loved Diana. But the public despised her. His mother, Queen Elizabeth, was deeply uncomfortable with the situation. The Church of England, of which the Queen was the supreme governor, frowned on divorce and remarriage. Charles was the future supreme governor of that same church. How could he marry a divorced woman, especially one who was so unpopular? But Charles was determined. For once in his life, he would put his personal happiness first. He would be with the woman he loved, regardless of what anyone else thought. The rehabilitation of Camilla's image was slow and carefully orchestrated. It began with baby steps. In January of 1999, Charles and Camilla were photographed leaving a birthday party together, the first time they had been publicly photographed as a couple. The reaction was mixed, but it wasn't as hostile as feared. Gradually, very gradually, Camilla began appearing at more events. She attended Charles's official functions. She was seen with him at polo matches, at the opera, at dinners. Each appearance was carefully planned to normalize their relationship in the public eye. In 1998, William met Camilla for the first time since his mother's death. It was a crucial meeting. If William rejected Camilla, Charles's relationship with her would become untenable. But William, who was mature beyond his 16 years, was reportedly polite and friendly. He understood that his father loved this woman, and he wanted his father to be happy. Harry would meet her later, and he too was accepting, though perhaps less enthusiastic than his older brother. The real breakthrough came in 2005. By then, Charles and Camilla had been together, openly, if not officially, for years. Camilla had slowly won grudging acceptance from some segments of the public. She would never be loved the way Diana was loved, but the active hostility had faded. People were tired of the drama. Charles was in his 50s. Camilla was in her late 50s. They loved each other. Why shouldn't they marry? On the 10th of February, 2005, Clarence House announced that Charles and Camilla were engaged. The wedding was planned for the 8th of April at Windsor Castle. It would be a civil ceremony, not a church wedding. Charles, as a divorced man marrying a divorced woman, couldn't have a full church ceremony, but there would be a blessing afterward at St. George's Chapel, conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Queen Elizabeth did not attend the civil ceremony itself. Her presence might suggest approval that she wasn't entirely comfortable giving, but she attended the blessing and hosted a reception afterward at Windsor Castle. In her speech at the reception, she made a joke that broke the tension. They have overcome Baker's Brook and the chair and all kinds of other terrible obstacles. They have come through, and I'm very proud and wish them well. My son is home and dry with the woman he loves. Baker's Brook and the chair are famous obstacles in the Grand National Horse Race, notoriously difficult jumps. Elizabeth was acknowledging with dry humour that Charles and Camilla had faced enormous obstacles and had persevered. It was as close to a public blessing as she would give, and it meant everything. Camilla became the Duchess of Cornwall rather than the Princess of Wales. The Princess of Wales title was too closely associated with Diana. It would have been insensitive and tone-deaf for Camilla to use it. When Charles became king, Camilla would technically be entitled to be called queen, but initially it was announced she would be known as Princess Consort. She supported causes close to her heart: literacy, animal welfare, supporting victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. She was warm with people she met. She had a sense of humour. She didn't try to be Diana. She was herself, and gradually people appreciated that authenticity. By the time Queen Elizabeth died in September of 2022 and Charles became King Charles III, public opinion about Camilla had shifted dramatically. Elizabeth, in one of her final public statements during her Platinum Jubilee celebrations earlier that year, had expressed her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. It was a clear blessing, and most of the public accepted it. Camilla became Queen Consort, later styled simply as Queen Camilla. The woman who had once been the most hated in Britain had become, if not beloved, then at least respected and accepted. It was a remarkable transformation, achieved through patience, hard work, and the simple passage of time. Charles's reign as king has been more complicated. He became king at 73, having waited longer than any heir in British history. He is an activist king, involved in causes like climate change and organic farming in ways that his mother never was. Elizabeth kept her political opinions entirely private. Charles has been less restrained. Some admire his willingness to speak out on important issues. Others worry that he oversteps the constitutional role of a monarch. But the story of Charles and Camilla is, in its own way, a love story. Not a fairy tale. It's far too messy for that. But it's a story of two people who loved each other for more than 50 years, who made terrible mistakes, who hurt people including Diana, but who ultimately ended up together. Whether you see it as romantic or selfish probably depends on your perspective. Perhaps it's both. Diana's shadow will always hang over them. Charles can never fully escape the knowledge that his treatment of Diana hurt her deeply and contributed to her unhappiness. Camilla can never fully escape being the other woman, but they have each other, and after everything they've been through, perhaps that's enough. While Charles and Camilla were slowly rehabilitating their relationship, another royal romance was quietly blossoming, one that would prove far more successful, far more stable, and far more popular. William, Diana's eldest son, the future king, had met someone at university, a pretty middle-class girl named Catherine Middleton, and their love story would give the monarchy something it desperately needed: hope for the future. Catherine Elizabeth Middleton was born on the 9th of January, 1982, in Reading, Berkshire. She came from a solidly middle-class family. Her parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, had met while working as flight attendants for British Airways. In 1987, they founded Party Pieces, a mail-order company selling party supplies and decorations. The business was successful, allowing them to send Catherine, known as Kate, and her younger siblings, Pippa and James, to excellent private schools. Kate grew up in the village of Bucklebury in Berkshire. She attended St Andrew's School, then Down House, and finally Marlborough College, one of Britain's most prestigious boarding schools. At Marlborough, she was a good student and an excellent athlete, captaining the school's field hockey team. She was popular, but not flashy, pretty, but not ostentatious. She was, by all accounts, a normal, well-adjusted teenager from a loving, stable family. In 2001, Kate enrolled at the University of St Andrews in Scotland to study art history. It was the same year that Prince William, fresh from his gap year travelling and working in Chile and Africa, also enrolled at St Andrews to study art history. The presence of the second in line to the throne at the university caused enormous media interest. But William had negotiated an agreement with the British press. They would leave him alone during his university years in exchange for occasional photo opportunities. Remarkably, they honoured this agreement. William and Kate lived in the same dormitory, St Salvator's Hall, in their first year. They became friends. Both were athletic. William played water polo, Kate rowed. They moved in similar social circles, but they were just friends, nothing more. The story goes that William's interest in Kate became romantic at a student fashion show in March of 2002. Kate was modelling, walking down the runway in a sheer dress over a black bikini. William, sitting in the audience, reportedly turned to a friend and said something like, "Wow, Kate's hot." Whether this story is entirely accurate or has been embellished over time, something shifted around that period. William and Kate became closer. By the autumn of their second year, they were dating. They moved with other friends into a flat on Hope Street in St Andrews. The relationship was kept relatively quiet. Fellow students were discreet. There was an understanding that William deserved privacy. He was just another student, studying hard, going to parties, playing sports, living a relatively normal life for the first time. Kate seemed perfect for William. She was pretty without being glamorous in a threatening way. She was middle class, but had been educated at elite schools, so she understood his world, even if she wasn't born into it. She was sensible, stable, from a close-knit family, the opposite of the dysfunction William had experienced in his own family. She didn't seem fazed by his royal status. She treated him normally, which was exactly what he needed. In March of 2004, they were photographed together at a ski resort in Switzerland, apparently confirming the relationship. The British press had respected William's privacy at university, but now that he was on holiday, they felt the agreement didn't apply. The photographs made headlines. William had a girlfriend, and she was a commoner. The scrutiny on Kate intensified after William graduated in 2005. She was followed everywhere by paparazzi. Photographers camped outside her flat. They followed her to work. She was working for her parents' company and also as an accessories buyer for a clothing retailer. They photographed her constantly. It was reminiscent of the early days of Diana and Charles, though perhaps not quite as intense. Kate handled it with remarkable grace and composure. She smiled politely, but said nothing to reporters. She went about her life as normally as possible. She didn't court attention or give interviews. She was dignified and discreet. The palace was impressed by how well she handled the pressure. But in April of 2007, William and Kate broke up. The reasons were never made entirely clear. William was in military training at Sandhurst. Kate felt uncertain about the relationship. They had been together for years, but William hadn't proposed. There was no clear timeline for marriage. She may have wanted more commitment. William, only 24, may have felt he needed to explore other options before settling down. Or perhaps the pressure and scrutiny simply became too much. The breakup lasted only a few months. By June, they were back together. They realized they didn't want to be with anyone else. William was reportedly the one who initiated the reconciliation. Reaching out to Kate and asking for another chance, she gave it to him. After that, the relationship became more serious. Kate attended more events with William. She met his family more formally. She was clearly being vetted as a potential future queen, and she passed every test. In October of 2010, William proposed to Kate during a holiday in Kenya. He had been carrying his mother's engagement ring, the sapphire and diamond ring that Diana had worn, waiting for the right moment. At a romantic spot overlooking a lake, William got down on one knee and asked Kate to marry him. She said yes. The engagement was announced on the 16th of November 2010. In the official interview, William explained why he had given Kate his mother's ring. "It's my mother's engagement ring, so I thought it was quite nice because obviously she's not going to be around to share in any of the fun and excitement of it all. This was my way of keeping her close to it all." Kate was wearing the ring in the interview, that famous sapphire, now on her finger. She seemed poised and happy. William was clearly smitten. They spoke about how they met, how their relationship had developed, how William had been planning the proposal for a while. When asked if they were in love, unlike Charles and Diana's infamous response to the same question, both William and Kate said definitely, without hesitation. The wedding date was set for the 29th of April 2011 at Westminster Abbey. The excitement built for months. This would be Britain's first major royal wedding since Charles and Diana's in 1981, 3 decades earlier, and everyone hoped this one would have a happier ending. Kate's dress was kept secret until the wedding day. When she stepped out of the car at Westminster Abbey, the world saw the dress for the first time. It was designed by Sarah Burton at Alexander McQueen. Ivory satin and lace, elegant and timeless, with long sleeves and a fitted bodice. The lace applique on the bodice and skirt featured roses, thistles, daffodils and shamrocks, the symbols of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Kate wore the Cartier halo tiara, lent by the Queen, and she looked absolutely beautiful. Nearly 2,000 guests filled Westminster Abbey. Millions more watched on television around the world. Kate walked down the aisle on her father's arm, looking nervous but happy. William waited at the altar with his brother Harry, who was best man. William was wearing his military dress uniform of the Irish Guards. The ceremony was traditional and beautiful. The Dean of Westminster conducted the service. The Archbishop of Canterbury performed the marriage. The Bishop of London gave the sermon. Kate and William exchanged vows, rings. Kate received a wedding band made from Welsh gold, but William chose not to wear a ring, which was his personal preference. They were pronounced husband and wife. The moment everyone waited for came on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The newlyweds, now the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, stepped out with their families. The crowd roared. William and Kate kissed, once, then a second time, as the crowd cheered for more. RAF planes flew overhead in formation. It was a perfect fairy tale moment. The difference from Charles and Diana's wedding was palpable. William and Kate seemed genuinely happy and comfortable with each other. There was no sense of uncertainty or doubt. They had dated for years. They knew each other well. They had chosen each other freely, without the pressure that Charles had faced to find a suitable bride quickly. This felt like a marriage built on real love and compatibility, not dynastic duty. Kate took to royal life remarkably well. She was never going to be Diana. Charismatic, glamorous, emotionally open. Kate was more reserved, more controlled. But she was warm and genuine in her interactions with the public. She was particularly good with children, often kneeling down to their level to talk with them. She supported causes related to children's mental health, early childhood development, and addiction. She worked hard at her royal duties without seeking attention or drama. William and Kate had 3 children. Prince George, born on the 22nd of July, 2013. Princess Charlotte, born on the 2nd of May, 2015. And Prince Louis, born on the 23rd of April, 2018. Kate was determined to be hands-on parents, just as Diana had been. They hired a nanny, but did much of the parenting themselves. They tried to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, taking them to school, having playdates with non-royal children, spending time at their country home in Norfolk. The contrast with Charles and Diana's parenting was notable. William and Kate were a team, supporting each other, presenting a united front. There was no drama, no affairs, no competing narratives in the press. They were, by all appearances, happily married. It was almost boring in its stability, and that was exactly what the monarchy needed. Kate faced criticism occasionally. Some felt she didn't work hard enough, that she took too much time off for her children. Others criticized her for being too conventional, too safe in her fashion choices and public statements. But these were minor criticisms. Overall, she was popular and respected. William and Kate represented the monarchy's best hope for the future. They were young, attractive, relatable. They weren't aristocratic snobs. Kate came from a middle-class background, and she hadn't forgotten it. They were devoted parents. They seemed genuinely in love. They modernized the monarchy in small but meaningful ways, being more accessible, talking about mental health, showing more emotion than previous generations had. But while William was successfully preparing to be king, his younger brother Harry was struggling to find his role. Harry had always been the spare, the second son, the one who didn't have to carry the weight of future kingship. He could be more relaxed, more fun, more himself. But being the spare came with its own pressures and pain. And when Harry met an American actress named Meghan Markle, everything would change. The romance seemed exciting at first, modern and fresh, but it would end with Harry and Meghan walking away from royal life entirely, causing the biggest crisis the monarchy had faced since Diana's death. When Prince Harry first saw Meghan Markle's Instagram profile in the summer of 2016, he was immediately intrigued. Meghan was beautiful, mixed race with an elegant, sophisticated look. She was an actress, known for her role as Rachel Zane on the legal drama Suits. She was intelligent and articulate, passionate about causes like gender equality and racial justice. She seemed perfect. They were set up on a blind date by a mutual friend in July of 2016. The first date went so well, they immediately planned a second. By the third date, they were completely smitten with each other. Harry later said he fell in love with Meghan incredibly quickly. Meghan was different from anyone Harry had dated before. She was older, 3 years his senior. She was American, from Los Angeles. She was biracial. Her mother was African American. Her father was white. She had been married before, divorced. She had a career and was financially independent. She was confident and outspoken about her beliefs. In every way, she was the opposite of what people expected a British prince to marry. But Harry didn't care about expectations. He had watched his brother William marry for love. He had seen how his mother had suffered in a marriage where love was absent. He was determined to marry someone he genuinely loved, someone who made him happy, regardless of whether she fit the traditional mold. The relationship moved quickly. Within a few months, they were deeply in love. Meghan would fly to London to visit Harry. He would visit her in Toronto, where Suits was filmed. They tried to keep the relationship private as long as possible, but in October of 2016, the tabloids broke the story. The media response was immediate and intense. Meghan was scrutinized in ways that felt invasive and often racist. British tabloids ran headlines describing her as almost straight outta Compton, playing on racist stereotypes about the Los Angeles neighborhood where her mother lived. They dug into her family history, finding her half-sister and father, who would later cause enormous problems. They criticized everything about her: her acting career, her previous marriage, her family, her race. In November of 2016, Harry took the extraordinary step of issuing a public statement through Kensington Palace, essentially confirming the relationship and condemning the media coverage. The statement said Meghan had been subject to a wave of abuse and harassment, including the smear on the front page of a national newspaper, the racial undertones of comment pieces, and the outright sexism and racism of social media trolls and web article comments. It was unprecedented for a member of the royal family to speak so directly about a relationship or to condemn the press so explicitly. But Harry had seen what media harassment had done to his mother. He wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Meghan met William and Kate early in the relationship. Reports suggested the meeting was cordial, but perhaps not warm. There were rumors that Kate and Meghan didn't gel, that their personalities were very different. Kate was reserved and traditional. Meghan was more outspoken and modern. Whether there was actual tension or just media speculation creating drama is unclear. More importantly, Meghan met Queen Elizabeth. The meeting went well. The Queen reportedly liked Meghan and was happy that Harry had found someone who made him happy. Prince Charles also welcomed Meghan warmly. The official approval seemed to be there. On the 27th of November, 2017, Harry and Meghan announced their engagement. Harry had proposed earlier that month at Nottingham Cottage, their home on the grounds of Kensington Palace. He designed the ring himself, a centre diamond from Botswana, where they had travelled together early in their relationship, flanked by two smaller diamonds from Princess Diana's personal jewellery collection. In the engagement interview, they were clearly in love. Meghan spoke eloquently about her admiration for Harry's humanitarian work. Harry praised Meghan's compassion and strength. When asked if they thought the media scrutiny would continue, they both said they were prepared for it and would support each other. The wedding was set for the 19th of May 2018 at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. It would be a smaller, more intimate affair than William and Kate's wedding, but still a major royal event. Meghan's wedding preparations were reportedly difficult. She was navigating royal protocols and traditions that were foreign to her. Her relationship with her father, Thomas Markle, deteriorated publicly in the days before the wedding. Thomas staged photographs with paparazzi, was paid for the pictures, then claimed he had suffered a heart attack and couldn't attend the wedding. The drama played out in tabloids worldwide. Meghan was reportedly devastated. In the end, Prince Charles walked Meghan down the aisle, a kind gesture that also highlighted her father's absence. Meghan wore a dress designed by Claire Waite Keller for Givenchy, simple, elegant, with a boat neck and three-quarter sleeves. Her veil was 16 feet long and embroidered with flowers representing all 53 Commonwealth countries. The wedding ceremony incorporated African-American culture in ways no royal wedding had before. The Most Reverend Michael Curry, the first African-American presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, gave a passionate sermon about the power of love. A gospel choir sang "Stand By Me." It was a beautiful blending of British royal tradition and American, specifically African-American culture. Harry and Meghan seemed radiantly happy. The sun shone, the crowds cheered. It looked like a fairy tale. Meghan was now the Duchess of Sussex. She seemed poised to become a breath of fresh air in the royal family. Modern, diverse, passionate about social causes. But almost immediately, things started to go wrong. The British tabloids turned on Meghan with a viciousness that was shocking. Everything she did was wrong. If Kate did something, it was wonderful. If Meghan did the same thing, it was terrible. When Kate cradled her baby bump, she was praised as a loving mother-to-be. When Meghan did it, she was criticized as attention-seeking. The double standard was blatant and felt deeply rooted in racism, though many refused to acknowledge that. Stories began emerging about Meghan being difficult to work with, that she was demanding, that she made staff cry, that she sent emails at 5 a.m., expecting immediate responses. Kensington Palace called these stories a calculated smear campaign. Meghan's supporters said she was being held to impossible standards, and that similar behaviour from male royals would be called decisive leadership. Critics said she was genuinely difficult and couldn't handle criticism. In May of 2019, Meghan gave birth to Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. She and Harry chose not to give him a royal title. He was simply Archie, though as grandson of the monarch, he was entitled to be called Lord Archie or to use his father's subsidiary title. They wanted to give him as normal a life as possible, but the criticism of Meghan continued. She was accused of being too Hollywood, too expensive. Her wardrobe costs were calculated and compared unfavourably to Kate's. She was criticised for the renovations to Frogmore Cottage, their home, even though many of the costs were for security measures required by the government. She was accused of alienating her family and Harry's family. Every move she made was scrutinised and found wanting. Harry watched his wife being torn apart by the same media that had hounded his mother. He saw racist undertones in much of the coverage. He felt powerless to protect her, and he felt that the royal family wasn't doing enough to support them or push back against the negative press. In October of 2019, Harry and Meghan gave a bombshell interview to ITV as part of a documentary about their tour of South Africa. Meghan, looking tired and sad, was asked how she was coping. "Not many people have asked if I'm okay," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "It's a very real thing to be going through behind the scenes." Harry spoke about his fear of history repeating itself, of losing Meghan the way he lost his mother. The interview was a cry for help, but instead of sympathy, it generated more criticism. Meghan was accused of being self-pitying, of complaining when she had such a privileged life. The message was clear. No matter how much she was suffering, she wouldn't get compassion from the British press or a significant portion of the British public. On the 8th of January, 2020, Harry and Meghan made an announcement that shocked the world. Via Instagram, they announced they were stepping back as senior members of the royal family. They would split their time between the UK and North America. They would become financially independent. They would continue to support the Queen, but would no longer carry out official royal duties. The announcement apparently blindsided the rest of the royal family. Queen Elizabeth was reportedly furious at being presented with a fait accompli. William was said to be deeply hurt that Harry hadn't consulted him. The palace issued a terse statement saying discussions are at an early stage, and these were complicated issues that will take time to work through. The media dubbed it Megxit, a play on Brexit. The term was criticised as misogynistic. It blamed Meghan rather than acknowledging this was a decision made by both Harry and Meghan. But the name stuck. A crisis meeting was held at Sandringham on the 13th of January, dubbed the Sandringham Summit. Queen Elizabeth, Charles, William, and Harry attended. Meghan, who was in Canada, didn't attend in person, but may have joined by phone. They hammered out an agreement, Harry and Meghan would step back from royal duties entirely. They would lose their HRH titles and couldn't use them. They would repay the costs of renovating Frogmore Cottage. They couldn't use the Sussex royal brand they had trademarked. Charles would provide some financial support initially, but they would need to become self-supporting. There would be a 12-month review period. In March of 2020, Harry and Meghan carried out their final royal engagements. The last was the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey on the 9th of March. The body language was telling. Harry and Meghan sat separate from William and Kate, and there appeared to be tension. They didn't all process into the service together as they once had. The rift was visible. Then Harry and Meghan left. They moved first to Canada, then to California, settling in Montecito near Santa Barbara. They signed deals with Netflix and Spotify to produce content. They founded Archewell, their charitable foundation. They were building a new life, independent of the royal family. In March of 2021, they sat down with Oprah Winfrey for a bombshell interview that aired on CBS. 17 million Americans watched. The revelations were stunning. Meghan said that during her pregnancy with Archie, there had been concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born. She wouldn't say who made this comment, only that it wasn't Queen Elizabeth or Prince Philip. The implication of racism within the royal family was explosive. Meghan also revealed that she had experienced suicidal thoughts while pregnant and had asked the palace for mental health support, but was told it wouldn't be good for the institution. She said she felt abandoned and unsupported. Harry said that his father had at one point stopped taking his calls and had cut him off financially in the first quarter of 2020. He said he felt trapped by the system and that his family was trapped as well. When Oprah asked about his relationship with William, Harry said they were on different paths and that there was space between them. The interview caused an international sensation. The royal family was accused of racism and of failing to support a suicidal woman. William, confronted by reporters a few days later, responded tersely, "We're very much not a racist family." Queen Elizabeth issued a statement saying, "The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning," but added the now famous line, "Recollections may vary." It was a polite way of suggesting that Harry and Meghan's version of events might not be entirely accurate or complete. The damage was done. The rift between Harry and his family seemed irreparable. Meghan was unlikely to ever return to the UK for extended periods. Harry's relationship with William was apparently broken. The two brothers who had once been so close, who had grieved their mother together, who had supported each other through everything, now barely spoke. Harry and Meghan settled into their California life. Meghan launched various business ventures. Harry wrote a memoir, Spare, published in January of 2023, which contained explosive revelations about the royal family, physical altercation with William, accusations against Camilla, private details about William and Kate. The book was a bestseller, but further damaged Harry's relationships with his family. In June of 2021, Meghan gave birth to their daughter, Lilibet Diana, named after Queen Elizabeth's childhood nickname, and Diana. The Queen met Lilibet once via video call before she died. Whether she ever met her in person is unclear. Harry and Meghan's popularity in Britain plummeted. Polls showed them as among the least popular royals. In America, their popularity also declined after the initial sympathy faded. They were seen by some as whiny and entitled, complaining about their privileged lives while signing multi-million-dollar deals. But their supporters see it differently. They see a couple who were treated terribly by the British press and let down by the royal family. They see a biracial woman facing racism and a man trying to protect his wife from the fate that befell his mother. They see two people choosing mental health and happiness over duty and tradition. Whether you sympathize with Harry and Meghan or think they handled things poorly probably depends on your perspective. But their story represents a fundamental question about the modern monarchy. Can it adapt to include people who don't fit the traditional mold? Can it support members who want to do things differently? Or is the institution so rigid that anyone who doesn't conform must leave? Harry and Meghan chose to leave. They built a new life in California. They're financially independent, raising their children away from royal protocols and media scrutiny. They seem happy in their choice, though Harry has expressed regret about how things ended with his family. But while Harry was dealing with his California exile, another royal scandal was brewing back in Britain, one that would prove even more damaging and difficult to resolve. Prince Andrew, Queen Elizabeth's second son, had been keeping very questionable company, and when the truth came out, it would disgrace him and embarrass the entire royal family. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, was born on the 19th of February 1960, the second son and third child of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Unlike his older brother Charles, who was heir to the throne and constantly under scrutiny, Andrew had a relatively easier time. He served in the Royal Navy, including during the Falklands War in 1982, where he flew helicopters in combat. He was considered the Queen's favourite child, charming, confident, gregarious. He married Sarah Ferguson in 1986 in a joyous ceremony, and they had two daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. But Andrew and Sarah's marriage was troubled. They divorced in 1996, though they remained close friends and even continued living together at times. Andrew developed a reputation for arrogance and entitlement. He was nicknamed Air Miles Andy for his frequent travels. As Britain's trade envoy, he took expensive trips and stayed in luxury accommodations, all at taxpayer expense. He was criticized for associating with questionable business figures and dictators. But the real scandal began with his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, an American financier who seemed impossibly wealthy and well-connected. Epstein had homes in New York, Florida, New Mexico, Paris, and a private island in the Caribbean. He threw lavish parties attended by politicians, scientists, business leaders, and celebrities. He presented himself as a philanthropist and intellectual, funding scientific research and educational initiatives. Andrew met Epstein in 1999 through Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's girlfriend and close associate. Ghislaine was the daughter of British media tycoon Robert Maxwell, and she moved in aristocratic circles. She and Andrew had known each other for years. She introduced him to Epstein, and they became friends. What Andrew either didn't know or chose to ignore was that Epstein was a sexual predator who was abusing underage girls. Epstein would lure teenage girls, often from poor backgrounds, with promises of money for massages. The massages would escalate to sexual abuse. Epstein and his associates, including Ghislaine Maxwell, would then traffic these girls to wealthy and powerful men. In 2008, Epstein was convicted in Florida of soliciting prostitution from a minor. He pleaded guilty to 2 charges and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, though he was allowed to leave for work during the day as part of an incredibly lenient work release program. The case should have ended Epstein's social acceptability, but somehow his wealth and connections allowed him to rehabilitate his reputation, and Andrew remained friends with him. In December of 2010, just months after Epstein was released from prison, Andrew stayed at Epstein's Manhattan mansion for 3 days. They were photographed together in Central Park. The British press criticized Andrew for associating with a convicted sex offender. Andrew's position as trade envoy became untenable, and he was forced to step down in 2011. But the full extent of Epstein's crimes and Andrew's potential involvement wouldn't come to light until years later. In 2015, court documents related to a civil case against Epstein were unsealed. They contained allegations from Virginia Giuffre, who said that she had been trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell and forced to have sex with several men, including Prince Andrew. Giuffre said she was 17 when she first had sex with Andrew at Ghislaine Maxwell's London townhouse in March of 2001. She provided a photograph of herself with Andrew, his arm around her waist, with Ghislaine smiling in the background. Giuffre said she had sex with Andrew on 3 occasions, in London, New York, and on Epstein's private island. Andrew denied the allegations completely. He said he had no recollection of meeting Virginia Giuffre. He suggested the photograph might be fake, but the photograph looked genuine, and Giuffre's accounts were detailed and consistent. In August of 2019, Epstein was arrested on federal charges of sex trafficking minors in Florida and New York. He was held in a Manhattan jail awaiting trial. On the 10th of August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. The medical examiner ruled it suicide by hanging. Conspiracy theories abounded. Epstein knew too much about too many powerful people. Had he been murdered? Or had he taken his own life to avoid facing his crimes? With Epstein dead, attention turned to his associates, including Prince Andrew. In November of 2019, in an attempt to clear his name, Andrew agreed to a television interview with Emily Maitlis for the BBC's Newsnight programme. The interview was a disaster. Andrew came across as arrogant, lacking empathy for Epstein's victims, and his explanations for his behaviour were bizarre and unconvincing. He said he couldn't have been at Ghislaine's house in London on the night Giuffre alleged because he had been at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter Beatrice. He said he couldn't have been sweating when he danced with Giuffre at a London nightclub, as she had described, because he had a medical condition from the Falklands War that prevented him from sweating, a condition that has since resolved. He described Epstein as someone with an extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. Andrew showed no remorse for his friendship with a sex offender. He expressed no sympathy for Epstein's victims. He seemed more concerned with his own reputation than with the suffering of the young women who had been abused. The interview was described as a car crash and a PR disaster. Public and media reaction was immediate and damning. Within days, Andrew announced he was stepping back from royal duties for the foreseeable future. Charities and organizations began severing ties with him. His military affiliations and royal patronages were in jeopardy. In January of 2022, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit against Andrew in New York, alleging sexual assault. Andrew's lawyers tried to get the case dismissed, but a judge ruled it could proceed. Queen Elizabeth, in an unprecedented move, stripped Andrew of his military affiliations and royal patronages. He would no longer use his HRH title in any official capacity. He would defend the lawsuit as a private citizen. In February of 2022, Andrew settled the lawsuit out of court. The terms were not publicly disclosed, though reports suggested he paid several £1,000,000. The settlement included no admission of guilt, but Andrew acknowledged that Giuffre had been a victim of abuse, and he regretted his association with Epstein. The settlement didn't end the controversy. In 2025, new allegations emerged. The Mail on Sunday reported that Andrew had sent an email to Epstein in 2011, after Epstein's conviction, saying they were in this together and to keep in close touch. This contradicted Andrew's claim in the Newsnight interview that he had cut ties with Epstein after the 2010 visit to New York. Then, in late 2025, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir Nobody's Girl was published. Tragically, Geoffrey had died by suicide in April of 2025 at age 41. Her book contained even more disturbing allegations about Andrew, describing their encounters in graphic detail and painting him as entitled and callous. The pressure on Andrew intensified. In October of 2025, he announced he was giving up his Duke of York title and other honours. King Charles had reportedly been urging him to do this for some time. Andrew said the continued accusations were distracting from the work of the monarchy. He would no longer use his Duke of York title or his honours. He remained a prince. Only an Act of Parliament could remove that. But he was effectively exiled from public life. Andrew's fall from grace has been complete. He no longer carries out royal duties. He doesn't appear on the Buckingham Palace balcony for official events. He wasn't invited to spend Christmas with the royal family at Sandringham. He has become a pariah, an embarrassment, living quietly at Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate. The scandal has raised difficult questions. What did the royal family know about Epstein, and when did they know it? Andrew had bodyguards and staff who would have been aware of his movements and associations. Did they report concerns? Were those concerns ignored? And what about Ghislaine Maxwell, who introduced Andrew to Epstein? She was convicted in December of 2021 of recruiting and grooming underage girls for Epstein. She's currently serving a 20-year prison sentence. She had been a guest at royal events, photographed with the Queen. The royal family had welcomed her into their circle. Andrew's scandal is arguably more damaging to the monarchy than Harry and Meghan's departure. Harry and Meghan were fighting about roles, media treatment, and family dynamics. Serious issues, but ultimately personal. Andrew's scandal involves serious allegations of criminal behaviour and associations with a sex trafficking ring. It suggests poor judgment at best, complicity at worst. King Charles has tried to distance the monarchy from Andrew. He has reportedly been cutting Andrew's funding, trying to force him to move out of Royal Lodge into smaller, more modest accommodation. He wants to make clear that Andrew is not part of the working royal family. But Andrew is the king's brother and the Queen's son. He can't be entirely cast out. The situation remains unresolved and uncomfortable, a shadow hanging over the royal family. As the monarchy looks to the future under King Charles III, it faces challenges from multiple directions. Harry's absence leaves a hole in the working royal family. There are fewer people to carry out the hundreds of annual engagements. Andrew's disgrace has damaged the institution's reputation. Public opinion polls show declining support for the monarchy, especially among younger people. But there is hope too. William and Kate represent stability and dedication. Their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, are the future of the monarchy. If the institution can navigate these scandals, adapt to modern expectations, and prove its continued relevance, it may survive another generation. The story of the modern royal family has been one of duty colliding with desire, tradition wrestling with change, and public expectations clashing with private realities. From Elizabeth as a young mechanic in wartime to the scandals of the 21st century, the House of Windsor has survived crises that might have toppled lesser institutions. But perhaps the greatest crisis was still to come. The loss of the anchor who had held it all together for 70 years. Queen Elizabeth, who had devoted her entire life to service, who had weathered every storm with quiet dignity, would not live forever. And when she died, the world would mourn not just a monarch, but the end of an era. As Queen Elizabeth entered her 90s, the signs of aging became more apparent. She began using a walking stick for public engagements in October of 2021. She started appearing less frequently, allowing Charles, William, and other working royals to take on more of her duties. But she remained mentally sharp and committed to her role. The most devastating blow came on the 9th of April, 2021, when Prince Philip died at Windsor Castle. He was 99 years old, just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. Philip had been Elizabeth's constant companion for 73 years of marriage, the longest marriage of any British monarch. He had been by her side through everything, supporting her, advising her, making her laugh. The funeral, held on the 17th of April at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Because of COVID-19 restrictions, only 30 people could attend. Elizabeth sat alone in the chapel, masked and separated from others, a tiny figure in black, mourning her husband in solitude. The image of the Queen sitting alone at her husband's funeral became iconic, a symbol of the isolation and loss that so many had experienced during the pandemic. After Philip's death, Elizabeth seemed to diminish. She continued working. The red boxes still arrived daily. She still held audiences, still performed her duties, but the light had gone out of her eyes. She had lost her partner, her anchor. At 95 years old, she was grieving, and grief at that age is particularly difficult. In October of 2021, Elizabeth spent a night in the hospital for tests, unusual for her, as she rarely sought medical treatment. In November, she sprained her back and missed the National Service of Remembrance at the Cenotaph, one of the most important events on the royal calendar. She was clearly struggling physically, but in February of 2022, she reached a milestone, 70 years on the throne. Her Platinum Jubilee was celebrated throughout the year, culminating in a 4-day celebration in June. Despite her frailty, Elizabeth appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony for the Trooping the Colour ceremony. She attended some Jubilee events, though not all. Her appearances were carefully managed to preserve her energy. The Jubilee was bittersweet. It was a celebration of an extraordinary reign, but also clearly a farewell. Everyone knew that Elizabeth's time was running out. She had fulfilled her promise. Her whole life, long though it had been devoted to service. But she was tired now, ready to rest. On the 6th of September 2022, Elizabeth performed what would be her final public duty. At Balmoral Castle in Scotland, she accepted the resignation of Prime Minister Boris Johnson and appointed Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister. Normally, this ceremony took place at Buckingham Palace, but Elizabeth was too frail to travel to London, so the new PM came to her. Photographs from that meeting show Elizabeth smiling but looking shockingly frail. Her right hand was bruised, possibly from medical treatments. She leaned heavily on a walking stick. She looked like what she was, a very elderly woman nearing the end of her life. 2 days later, on the 8th of September, Buckingham Palace issued an unprecedented statement. The Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision. The Queen remains comfortable and at Balmoral. The wording was ominous. Royals are never said to be comfortable. That's hospice language, the language of end-of-life care. The message was clear to anyone paying attention. The Queen was dying. The royal family rushed to Balmoral. Charles was already there. William drove from Windsor. Harry was in London for a charity event and immediately cancelled his plans to travel to Scotland. Anne was already at Balmoral. Andrew, Edward and Sophie raced north, but some didn't make it in time. At 6:30 p.m. British summer time, Buckingham Palace announced that Queen Elizabeth II had died peacefully at Balmoral that afternoon. She was 96 years old. The news spread instantly around the world. In Britain, the BBC interrupted programming to announce the death. BBC presenters wore black, as per protocol. The news anchors on television looked genuinely shaken. Many of them had grown up with Elizabeth as Queen. Most British people had never known another monarch. People gathered outside Buckingham Palace silent and shocked. Many were crying. They left flowers at the gates. As darkness fell, a double rainbow appeared over Windsor Castle, prompting gasps from the crowds. Some saw it as a sign, a symbol that Elizabeth and Philip were reunited. The formal protocol swung into operation. Charles was now King Charles III. He became king the instant his mother died. His wife Camilla was now Queen Consort. William became the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne. Kate became the Princess of Wales. Charles released a statement. "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." 10 days of national mourning followed. Elizabeth's coffin was brought to Edinburgh, where it lay in state at St. Giles's Cathedral, allowing the Scottish people to pay their respects. Then it was flown to London and taken to Westminster Hall, where it lay in state for 4 days. Hundreds of thousands of people queued for hours. Some waited more than 24 hours to file past the coffin and pay their final respects. The queue stretched for miles along the Thames. People from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, came to say goodbye to their queen. The state funeral took place on the 19th of September 2022 at Westminster Abbey. It was the first state funeral for a British monarch since Winston Churchill's in 1965. 2,000 people attended the service, including world leaders, foreign royals, and representatives from the organizations Elizabeth had supported. The service was solemn and beautiful. The hymns Elizabeth had chosen herself were sung. The Archbishop of Canterbury gave the sermon, speaking about Elizabeth's faith and her dedication to service. At the end, the last post was played, a military bugle call traditionally used at military funerals, followed by 2 minutes of silence observed across the United Kingdom. Then, Revel was played, signalling the end of the funeral. Elizabeth's coffin was then taken to Windsor Castle for a committal service at St. George's Chapel, where Philip's coffin had rested for more than a year. Finally, in a private burial that evening, Elizabeth was laid to rest in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, alongside her father, mother, sister, and Philip. The 4 of them were together again. The we 4 reunited. The outpouring of grief was enormous, both in Britain and around the world. Elizabeth had been a constant presence for so long that her death felt like the end of an era, which it was. She had been queen for 70 years, serving 15 prime ministers, meeting countless world leaders, witnessing enormous changes in Britain and the world. She had been a symbol of continuity and stability through wars, economic crises, social upheavals, and political chaos. Elizabeth's legacy is complex. She modernized the monarchy in some ways, making it slightly more accessible and less formal than it had been. She showed that a woman could command respect and authority as a monarch. She fulfilled her promise of lifelong service with remarkable dedication. But critics argue she didn't modernize enough, that she remained too distant and formal, that she failed to adequately protect Diana or support Harry and Meghan, that she allowed Andrew's behavior to continue too long. Some point out that her reign saw the dissolution of the British Empire and the decline of Britain's global influence, though these were largely beyond her control. Perhaps her greatest achievement was simply endurance. She kept going, year after year, decade after decade, performing her duties with quiet dignity. She never gave interviews, never revealed her political opinions, never sought the spotlight for personal reasons. She was a symbol, not a personality, and she played that role perfectly. With Elizabeth's death, Charles became king at 73, the oldest person ever to ascend the British throne. William is now heir, With George as the future king after that, the succession is secure. But whether the monarchy can maintain its relevance and public support in the 21st century remains an uncertain question. The modern royal family has been shaped by secrets, scandals, love affairs, and tragedies. From young Elizabeth fixing truck engines during the Blitz to the Megxit drama of the 2020s, the story has been one of constant adaptation and survival. The institution has weathered storms that might have destroyed it: Diana's death, Charles's affair, Andrew's disgrace, Harry's departure. But it survives. Charles is now king. William and Kate are the future. The crown passes to the next generation, as it has for more than 1,000 years. Whether that tradition will continue for another 1,000 years, or whether the monarchy will fade into history within our lifetimes, only time will tell. What we know is this: the modern royal family story is far from over. New chapters are being written even now. New scandals will undoubtedly emerge. New love stories will begin. The drama will continue, because that's what families do. Royal or not, they love, they fight, they hurt each other, they reconcile or they don't, they endure or they break apart. The British monarchy has endured for centuries. It survived the English Civil War, the abdication crisis, 2 world wars, and the death of Princess Diana. It will probably survive whatever comes next, but it will be changed by those challenges, just as it has always been changed. And somewhere, perhaps, Elizabeth is watching. The young princess who promised her whole life to service, who kept that promise for 70 years, who bore the weight of the crown with such grace and dignity, can finally rest. Her duty is done. The crown has passed to Charles, and history will judge them all: the dutiful queen, the troubled prince, the people's princess, the spare who walked away, the disgraced duke, and all the others who played their parts in this long, strange, fascinating story. So close your eyes now, dear sleeper. Let these royal tales fade into your dreams. Let the weight of crowns and scandals drift away. Rest peacefully, knowing that somewhere in Windsor, in those ancient stones, the story continues. Kings and queens will rise and fall. Love stories will bloom and wither. Secrets will be kept and revealed. But for tonight, let it all be quiet. Let history become a gentle lullaby. Sleep well, sweet dreamer. The crown will still be there tomorrow, heavy with jewels and heavier with history, waiting for whoever must bear its weight next. Good night.